I call this hearing to order. I request unanimous consent that the Chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Hearing no objection, so ordered. I also request unanimous consent that we waive on to the committee Representatives Scanlon, Ruiz, Jacobs, Slotkin, and Garcia to join this hearing, where they may ask questions to our witnesses. They've all worked hard on legislation on the agenda today. Hearing no objection, so ordered. Today, our subcommittee is meeting both in person and remotely. I want to be clear about what makes this format possible. First, the wide availability of vaccines and boosters throughout the United States, and specifically to the members and staff of this committee. Second, the regular and continued adherence to recommended health and safety protocols. This pandemic is by no means over, but we have reached a point where we can safely engage in person if certain practices are followed. This information previously was provided to members and staff, but I want to reiterate what the committee will require in order for members and staff to participate in this hearing in person. One, if you're unvaccinated or your vaccination status is undetermined, you must wear a mask at all times. Two, if you're unvaccinated or your vaccination status is undetermined, you must maintain physical distance within the hearing room. Three, if you are feeling unwell, you should participate in the hearing remotely. And four, members are permitted to be accompanied by one staff member while they are present in the hearing room. During the covered period declared by the Speaker pursuant to House Resolution 8, remote participation in hearings will continue to be an option for members. For those members participating remotely, if you're experiencing connectivity issues, please make sure you or your staff contact our designated technical support staff so those issues can be resolved immediately. Members participating remotely must continue to remain visible on camera for the duration of their participation in the hearing unless they experience connectivity issues or other technical problems that render the member unable to fully participate on camera. It is committee policy that members participating remotely will remain muted when not recognized, and for those in the hearing room, the policy remains the same, that only members who are recognized or seeking recognition should unmute their microphone. This is out of courtesy to all members on the committee, and so that background noise does not interfere with another member who is recognized to speak. When you are recognized, whether in the hearing room or on the remote platform, you'll need to unmute your microphone and pause for 2 to 3 seconds before speaking so that your words are captured on the live stream. Without objection, members will be recognized in order of committee seniority for questioning witnesses today. This will make it easier for me to ensure all members participating have an opportunity to be recognized. With that bit of housekeeping out of the way, I now recognize myself for my opening statement. I want to welcome everyone to today's Economic Opportunity Subcommittee hearing, where we're reviewing 18 pieces of legislation. Today, our subcommittee will again consider bills and drafts that span our jurisdiction, and I thank the ranking member, our staff, and our VSO partners for their work. Several of our proposals today address social determinants of health for veterans, including food, housing, and legal needs. 2 years ago, our subcommittee hosted a hearing entitled Reviewing the Availability of Resources to Address Veteran Hunger. Since then, our committee has worked closely with VA, USDA, the Agriculture Committee, and nonprofit partners, and I'm proud of the focused collaboration on veteran food insecurity. Today, we're considering a bill that would establish an office within VA dedicated to addressing veteran hunger. This legislation would enable VA to analyze the data it has collected from its clinical screener on the prevalence of veteran food insecurity and report to Congress on an annual basis. The newly created office will also be authorized to operate a grant program aimed at connecting veterans and transitioning service members with the nutrition resources they need. We'll also consider a bill from my colleague, Congresswoman Scanlon, H.R. 3950, the Veterans Medical Legal Partnerships Act, which would codify medical legal partnerships at VA. Through these partnerships, veterans are screened for civil legal matters and then connected with no-cost legal service, which is routinely cited as the highest unmet need for our most vulnerable veterans. This bill also creates a pilot grant program to establish new medical legal partnerships for veterans, which can reduce recidivism and promote rehabilitation. Today, we're also considering several proposals related to veteran homelessness. My fellow Southern Californian, Congressman Ruiz, is leading the Health Care for Homeless Veterans Act. This bill expands eligibility for Health Care for Homeless Veterans Program, or HCVF, to those with other than honorable discharges. HCHF is commonly referred to as the front door for VA homeless programs, but for too long, that front door has been closed to veterans who are eligible for other VA programs like Grant and Per Diem, Supportive Services for Veteran Families, or HUD-VASH. With this bill, OTH veterans who present to a VA facility or a stand-down will not be turned away from accessing homeless programs due to their discharge status. My subcommittee colleague, Congressman Pappas, is leading H.R. 7753, the Preventing Homelessness for Veteran Families Act. This bill reauthorizes the Supportive Services for Veteran Families Program, or SSVF. SSVF is VA's key homelessness prevention program, and this bill authorizes funding beyond what has been provided in years past in order to support the SSVF Shallow Subsidy Initiative. Through Shallow Subsidy, VA and its grantees can subsidize up to 50% of a veteran's rent based on a reasonable rent calculation to prevent them from falling into homelessness. We'll never be able to effectively end veteran homelessness if we don't prevent veterans from falling into homelessness in the first place, and this bill is an investment in that effort. We have a number of reauthorizations for other important VA homelessness programs, such as the Advisory Committee on Homeless Veterans and Grant and Per Diem Special Needs. Ensuring the continuation of these programs in the years ahead will be vital in our march towards ending veteran homelessness. I'm interested in hearing feedback from VA and the non-governmental witnesses today on Congressman Kilmer's Tiny Homes for Homeless Veterans Act as well, which has undergone some changes since its introduction in December 2021. We'll also consider a bill to reauthorize through 2027 the Specially Adapted Housing Program for disabled veterans residing temporarily with a family member to ensure that upgrades can be made to the home to accommodate the veteran's needs. We also have a few proposals related to the VA Home Loan Guarantee Program, including Congressman Brown's VA Home Loan Grace Act, H.R. 6124. This legislation responds to suggestions from veterans on how this benefit could better reflect the reality of how veterans live and move around. This legislation provides flexibility by expanding the VA home loan within its existing entitlement and risk mitigation framework to ensure veterans and service members can meet their housing needs, while also making the best decisions to build and secure their families' financial futures. We'll also consider my bill, the Building Credit Access for Veterans Act of 2022. This legislation will authorize a pilot to help veterans with insufficient credit history to access the VA home loan program by approving alternate credit models for lenders who opt in to the pilot to use. The ultimate goal is to enable veterans who have not established traditional credit to access the VA home loan program by improving the creditworthiness determination process. Another bill of mine we will consider is the Emergency Relief for Service Members Act, which I introduced in October. My bill will allow service members to terminate internet, cable, or telephone contracts at no penalty if they entered them after receiving military orders for a permanent change of station, but then received a stop movement order due to an emergency. Military families make incredible personal sacrifices moving from one base to another, particularly when sudden stop movement orders interrupt those plans. The last thing they should be struck with is an extra bill for a place where they don't even live. The latest draft of this bill would also expand the definition of covered contracts to include gym memberships, fitness programs, and home security services, and expand protections to spouses and dependents who accompany service members during relocation. To further support the families of service members relocating due to military orders, we'll consider Congressman Garcia's H.R. 2650, the Military Spouse Licensing Relief Act. This bill will ensure the professional license of a service member or military spouse in good standing who moves due to military orders will be valid in their new community. We'll also consider my colleague Congresswoman Slotkin's bill, the Empowering Veterans Against Cyber Threats Act of 2022. This legislation authorizes a digital citizenship and media literacy grant program to help veterans recognize foreign influence and disinformation threats. Finally, as always, we have a number of education proposals we'll consider today. We'll consider my legislation, which expands VA retraining and high technology programs. This bill would expand access to the Veterans Rapid Retraining Assistance Program, or VRAP, by doubling the duration of benefits that each veteran can receive, removing age restrictions, loosening the restriction on veterans who already have education benefits, and allowing benefits to go towards a bachelor or graduate degree if a veteran is within 2 years of completion. It also opens up the Veterans Employment Through Technology Education courses, or VETTech program, to institutes of higher learning that want to participate as providers. My staff and I are working closely with VA to ensure these programs are improving veterans' employment outcomes, and I look forward to hearing from our witnesses how this bill may support VA in achieving those goals. I'm also pleased we're considering the minorities discussion draft to make technical fixes to VA study abroad program approvals for veterans seeking to use their education benefits at foreign schools. Finally, we'll also discuss the minorities bill that provides educational assistance benefits to veterans who receive sole survivorship discharges. We have a lot to cover today, so I'll conclude my comments and recognize my friend Ranking Member Moore for any opening remarks he may wish to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for continuing the bipartisan tradition on this subcommittee by including 6 Republican proposals out of the 18 bills being considered during today's legislative hearing. While I am generally supportive of the bills being considered today, pending scoring and offsets, of course, I do have concerns about potential unintended consequences that several of these bills may present. While I appreciate Mr. Brown's effort to expand the home loan program, I do worry that this would go a little too far and expand beyond the original mission of the program. This benefit is meant to give veterans an opportunity to purchase that primary residence, not become landlords. I also have concerns with the text of Ms. Slotskin's bill. While I'm sure we can all agree that educating veterans about safety online is a good thing, I'm not sure if the VA should be funding these community grants. I believe the Department of Homeland Security should be making funding decisions, as I don't know if the VA has the knowledge or the ability to make these decisions. I want to briefly comment on the GOP bills that are on the agenda today. First, I am supportive of Ranking Member Bost, H.R. 7735, the Improving Access to the VA Home Loan Act of 2022. This bill would direct the VA to examine the regulations regarding the use of minimum property requirements and appraisals in the home loan program. The VA home loan program's no money down mortgage has helped millions of veterans purchase a home and own a part of the American dream. Unfortunately, as we discussed oversight hearing on the home loan program earlier this year, many veterans have found that the VA loan program is not competitive in today's hot mortgage market. As interest rates continue to rise, it will be important for the VA to examine their processes and see what can be done to reduce the timeline of closings. I know that Mr. Bell and the VA home loan staff are working hard to modernize these procedures, and I hope that this legislation will help them complete their already great work. I thank the mortgage bankers for their advocacy in this proposal and for being here today. I also want to mention I'm supportive of the GOP bills being considered to include Mr. Joyce's bill that would extend full post-9/11 GI Bill benefits to service members who have been discharged under the DOD sole survivor rules. Mr. Cawthorn's bill that would amend the Service Members Civil Relief Act to help military spouses choose which state to claim their permanent state of residence for tax purposes. Mr. Garcia's bill that would amend the Service Members Civil Relief Act and make it easier for active duty spouses to maintain professional license when they move to another state on military orders. The draft bill that would make it easier for veterans to use the GI benefits to participate to study abroad in programs. The draft bill that would authorize a pilot program to create an IT system that helps connect homeless veterans to local service providers. Finally, I asked the Department to fulfill my request from our last legislative hearing in March to provide views on H.R. 6671. This bill, authored by our colleague Mr. Fitzpatrick, would provide full GI benefits to service members who were discharged because of their refusal to take the COVID-19 vaccine. It is essential that we have the Department's view on this legislation. It is simply unacceptable that months after we ask for views, we have yet to receive them. I want to thank our witnesses who are here today to testify. I look forward to hearing their thoughts about how we can improve upon the legislation before us today. And excuse me, and with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
I thank the ranking member, and I appreciate his bipartisan collaboration. And we will always, as long as I have anything to do about it, we'll always run this subcommittee in a bipartisan way. So I appreciate the collaboration. For our first panel today, we'll hear from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Hopefully they're on. I think they are. Hello there. First, we have Mary Glenn, Acting Executive Director of the Education Service for the Veterans Benefits Administration. Good morning. Thank you for joining the subcommittee today. Ms. Glenn is accompanied by Monica Diaz, Executive Director of the Homeless Programs Office for the Veterans Health Administration. Nice to see you. And John Bell, Acting Executive Director of Loan Guarantee Service for the Veterans Benefits Administration. Welcome back, Ms. Diaz and Mr. Bell. Both of you have testified before our subcommittee in the last 6 months. We're keeping you busy, but we definitely appreciate you both making yourselves available. With that, I'll now recognize Ms. Glenn for 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, Chairman, Ranking Member Moore, and other members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you to discuss pending legislation pertaining to programs and services offered by VA. Accompanying me today are John Bell, Acting Executive Director for the Veterans Benefits Administration's Loan Guarantee Service, and Monica Diaz, Executive Director for Homeless Programs and Clinical Services at the Veterans Health Administration. Mr. Chairman, with 18 bills on the agenda, I will just cover a few in my oral statement. We are glad to support H.R. 6124, the Home Loan Grace Act, which would increase the maximum amount of the home loan guarantee entitlement available to certain veterans and make other changes. Despite our strong support for this bill, VA believes there are a couple of potential unintended effects. We have highlighted these concerns in our written testimony. While these concerns do not affect VA's support of the bill, VA does appreciate the opportunity to draw the committee's attention to them. I wanted to share with you that since my colleague, Mr. Bell, testified before this committee, VA has continued to improve the competitiveness of this valuable earned benefit. Over the last 6 months, appraisal timeliness has decreased by 1 full business day to 10.8. Appraisals meeting or exceeding sales price have increased from 85% to 91%. And the number of unassigned appraisals has declined from 2,250 to 140. Other bills we support would make impactful changes to VA's program by expanding VA's authority for its health care for homeless veterans program, increasing the appropriation for supportive services for very low income veteran families, and extending VA's authority to provide adaptations to the residence of a family member of certain disabled veterans. VA would also support the Improving the VA Home Loan Benefit Act of 2022 and the draft bill to provide eligibility for educational assistance under the post 9/11 GI Bill to certain individuals who receive sole survivorship discharges if these bills were amended. There are other bills on the agenda that raise concerns, including the draft bill to expand the VRAP and Vet Tech programs. Although VA supports the provision that would expand the Vet Tech program to allow participants to pursue a degree at an institute of higher learning as long as the program does not lead to a degree, VA has significant concerns with the VRAP provision and does not support this bill as currently drafted. Let me explain why. The proposed changes in Section 1A would fundamentally change the requirements of VRAP just months away from December 11th, 2022, the last day students may begin training under VRAP. These changes would generate confusion for beneficiaries and create new administrative burdens for educational institutions and VA. The change to authorize VRAP benefits for programs leading to a degree within 24 months of enrollment is particularly problematic. VA does not currently collect, store, or track information on the pursuit of degree programs in terms of allowable months of enrollment for completion. Finally, it is unclear as written whether the changes in Section 1A, such as the increase from 12 months to 24 months of benefit entitlement, should be applied retroactively to include VRAP beneficiaries currently pursuing a program and individuals who have been issued a certificate of eligibility but have not yet begun pursuit of a program, or if it would only apply to new applications received on or after date of enactment. VA is willing to discuss these matters further and provide technical assistance if desired. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my testimony. My colleagues and I are prepared to respond to any questions you or other members of the subcommittee may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Glenn. With that, I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes to begin the question portion of the hearing. And I want to start out, Ms. Glenn, with what you just said about VRAP. As I think you know, I've been meeting with the Education Service on a quarterly basis to ensure that we fully utilize the $386 million appropriated by Congress for VRAP to retrain veterans before the program expires this December. And I think, as you know, when we created this program and funded it, the idea was we'd train up about 17,000 plus veterans. Your testimony notes that making the changes proposed in my draft bill to expand VRAP before its expiration, as you say, would generate confusion and create new administrative burdens. But I think you also know that absent any changes, VA is currently on track to return a substantial portion of the program's funding to the Treasury, where it's not going to help veterans. And that is unacceptable. The status quo is entirely unacceptable. And I hope you're going to agree with me that it's unacceptable. And if you do, I want to hear from you what alternate solutions, what productive solutions would you suggest in order to improve participation? Because what you're doing is not working.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your question. I can tell you that we are doing everything we can to increase participation in VRAP. As you know, we had a public service announcement campaign that is still ongoing and will be ongoing through mid-summer. We have seen an uptick in applications since that public service campaign began at the end of February. There are several things that we are looking at to increase participation. One of the issues with the bill, though, is the fact that the sunset date for the end of the bill remains at December 11th, 2022. You did expand the scope of participation in the bill quite a bit. And our concern is that we would be able to get the applications changed and get the information out to veterans to let them know about the expansion of the scope prior to December 11th, 2022. To
So I get it, but rather than running out the clock and sending the money back to Treasury, let's work collaboratively and let's try to help the veterans as this was intended. That's what I'd like to see. And I'm going to need your partnership and collaboration in the weeks and months ahead. I want to see benchmarks. I want to see goals, not just saying we're going to run out the clock and send the money back to Treasury in December. That is not acceptable. So I'll move on. Mr. Bell, I'd like to discuss the Building Credit Access for Veterans Act. I understand that few, if any, VA home loans are obtained using more financially inclusive alternative credit scoring models, even though thousands of commercial lenders routinely use such alternative models when processing other types of loans. How many VA home loans during the past 3 years involve veterans whose credit approval was generated using an alternative credit scoring model that utilized rent, utility, and other payment history data that diverges from the conventional scoring model?
Thank you, Chairman Levin, for that question. And the answer is around 9%. That is the problem with the credit scoring models as VA sees them, is we see them as closed loans. We're not able to see and really track and monitor, because we don't have an automated underwriting system that tells us where the veteran makes application through the process of getting a closed loan. So what we do know is that 9% are the loans that were not approved eligible, that had a manual underwrite, and in that manual underwrite, a full look at all credit availability is there, including rents and non-standard utilities, things that are not coming up on the credit bureau. So 9% is the quick answer to that, sir.
Thank you. Your testimony on the legislation asserts that a pilot program is unnecessary, but considering that more veterans aren't benefiting from alternative credit scoring models, isn't enactment of this legislation exactly what we need? Isn't it fully justified to maximize the number of veterans who can leverage this important federal program and achieve home ownership?
Yes, sir. What we want to do is continue to work to understand the complexity of instead of forcing a product or solution out there for lenders, what we have normally done is allow them to choose what credit model they want to choose. They can choose an alternative credit model now. There's nothing that prohibits them from doing that, especially, and as a matter of fact, we encourage that, sir. But we certainly can work with the committee to understand how that would better serve our community, our veteran community. But they have that ability now.
Well, I would certainly encourage you to work with the committee to build mutual understanding of the need for this legislation. Let me just ask one final question on the topic of VA home loans, and specifically Ranking Member Boss improving access to the VA Home Loan Act. Can you provide any data on how long it takes to get a VA appraisal as compared to a traditional appraisal?
So there's not an industry standard data point of a comparison between the appraisal management companies versus our fee panel. What we do have is, of course, how VA performs. VA performs an appraisal in 10.8 business days. We've seen a dramatic increase since I was there in December in the ability to hit that sales price for veterans, where we increased from 85 to 91%. But there's not a standard way at this point in time to compare VA timeliness versus the industry timeliness.
Thank you, Mr. Bell, and I'm out of time, so I'll recognize the ranking member for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bell, I understand your perspective that the 90-day time frame for a VA review appraisals rules would be tough to meet. Would you be more supportive of a bill if the VA has maybe 180 days or what? I mean, even up 365 days to complete this review?
Yes, sir. So on the basis of looking at the appraisal process as a whole, VA certainly submits that there are things that we want to do to align ourselves into today's market. And so to do that, we want to make sure that we're not rushing into making decisions that are going to hurt downstream, especially as we look back to how that fee panel has served us through the Great Recession and those other times that we ran into significant financial problem and impact. So we certainly are looking at the full appraisal process. It's just getting from a regulatory standpoint, getting something out in that short of amount of time basically pulls all of our staff into working on that instead of concentrating on getting into the benefit, and that's what our concern is, sir.
Yeah, I understand. So if 90 days time frame is a little tough on appraisal rules, what would you recommend us shoot for, 180 days? I mean, do you have a number of days that you think are workable?
It would depend upon the how that is presented. If you want this in a regulatory format, which we think that in looking at the entire process of the appraisal, we might have to move some things into that, or we could do a phased approach from a policy standpoint. There are items such as relooking at the minimum property requirements and drilling those down into specific minimum property requirements on how they affect the appraisal, as well as things like desktop and where that fits in the waterfall approach of the appraisal. There are some things that we are going to be able to do in 90 days. There's some things we're going to be able to do in 180 days, but that regulatory framework is what extends that time frame.
Yeah, I understand, and I understand sometimes too the VA requires the guy to have two handrails, where in some cases it's one handrail, and so there's some things I think we can do to help expedite the process, and we're certainly willing to help with that. And so I need to ask Ms. Glenn a question while I'm on here, if segue on the cybersecurity bill. Do you think the VA, this authority grant making process would be better completed by the Department of Homeland Security? In essence, does the VA have the knowledge base on how to provide these funds?
Sir, we don't have anyone on the panel who can answer those questions, so I will be happy to take them back for the record.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bell, back to you, yes, then. Can you please tell us more about the potential unintended consequences of enacting the GRACE Act? Do you see the second home provisions out of the scope of the mission of the home loan program?
So I think there's a little confusion on wording here. And so basically what the GRACE Act does is it fixes some of the issues that were related to when we increased the ability for veterans to buy homes anywhere that they live and to compete for buying those homes against any other product out there. As we know, the VA product, we stand behind that it is the lowest cost at this point in time from a rate and a closing cost scenario for veterans. We want to continue that. But to put things in perspective, less than 2% right now of our active VA guaranteed loans have 2+ loans. Those 2+ loans are mainly due to because you've got veterans that either one would have to repair properties that they don't have the capability to repair those properties and move to put down the expenses required for that new home where they're moving. And some of them where they're required from an active duty military standpoint, they're required to move from a PCS a PCS requirement. And so they're kind of hedged into not being able to utilize the new benefit because they don't have that remaining entitlement that they can utilize.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Chairman, with that, I'm running out of time, so I'll yield back.
I thank the ranking member for his questions, and I'll recognize the gentleman from New Hampshire, Mr. Pappas, for his questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I wanted to ask a question for Ms. Diaz to begin. I recently introduced the Preventing Homelessness for Veteran Families Act, which reauthorizes and increases funding for the VA Supportive Services for Veterans Families, or SSVF program. SSVF is one of the most effective tools that VA has to prevent at-risk veterans from experiencing homelessness, and grants are awarded to organizations to assist very low-income veteran families residing in or transitioning to permanent housing. The grants provide a range of supportive services to veteran families that are designed to promote housing stability. And in 2019, as you know, VA built on the success of SSVF and introduced the Shallow Subsidy Initiative, which was targeted to veterans residing in areas with a high cost of living and provided up to 35% of their rent. Most notably, the shallow subsidy amount doesn't change regardless of increases or decreases in the veteran's household income or rent during a 2-year period. And I think the program's been successful. It's aided thousands of low-income veterans and their families and helped them find permanent housing of their own. Last year, VA expanded that program nationwide and increased the subsidy to a maximum of 50%. And so my bill supports this expansion by increasing the authorized funding for SSVF to reflect the costs of the Shallow Subsidy Initiative, and it also ensures that other critical facets of SSVF are funded. So I'm wondering, Ms. Diaz, if you can discuss any feedback or findings VA has received related to the effectiveness of shallow subsidy in particular, and its success at preventing veteran homelessness.
Thank you for the question, and great to be here again, by the way. First of all, I want to say that we support the bill. That's the first thing I want to say. It's a great bill. We thank you for putting this bill forward. As you very well stated, better than I could state it myself, the shallow subsidy entails all the aspects that you already mentioned. We are tracking very closely the shallow subsidy performance. At this moment, we only can see improvement on those. We're doing a data analysis for this year and then later on provide that data more comprehensively. But so far, what we have seen is that veterans and families, this is the beauty of this program, it's not only veterans, but their families and dependent are actually getting benefit from the subsidy, especially in high cost areas like you mentioned. And it's really helping us. What we can see is the outcome in terms of permanent housing placement, which is over 80% for our SSVF program. We can see as well the number of veterans that we are serving in prevention, which is as well a high number. We can see the utilization as well of the shallow subsidy, which is in a high score as well within the program. So as of now, we certainly can see that not only the implementation of the program, but the sustainability for it, we only see positive outcome, especially with everything going on right now in our country, you know, which merits the being very intentional with our efforts on that. I would like to reinforce one piece of what you mentioned, which is what SSVF is. And SSVF is one of our core programs. It provides service not only for the veterans, but the family, the dependent. Is one of our programs with great success for permanent housing placement. I will repeat this again, no less than 80% of permanent housing placement, which is the core and at the soul of ending veteran homelessness. So not only for the shallow subsidy, but for everything that SSVF represents, I think this is an outstanding bill, and we certainly support it.
Well, thank you for your support and those reflections about the shallow subsidy and SSVF. And we're going to continue to push this legislation and hope to continue to build some strong support in this committee and across the Congress for it. So appreciate those comments, and I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Appreciate it.
I thank the gentleman from New Hampshire. I'd now like to welcome and recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Garcia, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Moore. Appreciate the opportunity and appreciate all the efforts that the members of this precious committee do for our veterans and the service you all provide. I'm here today to support my bill, H.R. 2650, which is the Military Spouse Licensing Relief Act. This is actually a win-win-win bill. This is a win for our military families who would normally be dual income families with a spouse on active duty, or the wife, husband of an active duty member who is in a profession where they require a license. It's a win for our communities because we get another valuable member of our community to be able to serve in various practices that require licensing. And it's a win for the government and our nation's security. Right now, one of the biggest challenges our active duty service families have and our service members in terms of recruitment and retention is quality of life. And what we're seeing is as family members are moved around throughout the country, if they are moved from, say, South Carolina to California, if they're in a profession that requires a license, like a nurse, a teacher, a beautician, paralegal, a doctor, that license is not valid in the state that they get orders to. So when they move, they have to go through the requalification process, which is sometimes very lengthy, depending on the profession, in some cases more than a year, and in some cases very expensive. We're talking potentially thousands of dollars in some cases, depending on the profession. And so what ends up happening is the spouse of the active duty member ends up not going through that process. They can't afford it, they don't want to deal with it, and the dual income family now goes to a single income family, which, as you know, with military base pay the way it is insufficient and may put that family below the poverty line. Right now, military spouse unemployment is over 20%. This is significantly orders of magnitude higher than the national average. And as many as 34% of our military spouses on active duty, members, work in some form of field or profession that does require a license. So this would simply allow the spouse to cross-deck that license from one state to another. It's similar to what we do for our active duty families in terms of driver's licenses. It's a pretty straightforward approach to this. There are obviously efforts going on right now within various states for reciprocity. Those conversations are moving, frankly, too slowly. We're losing family members. We're losing active duty members, having a hard time retaining talent because of this. We had in the NDAA in 2018 an allotment for $500 to offset some and reimburse some of the expenses for relicensing. That was increased to $1,000 recently, but it's still too painful and too costly given what we have. We did get this bill passed in the NDAA last year, FY22 NDAA. It did not get through the Senate, unfortunately, but this is ultimately a very critical piece of legislation that will, again, be a win-win-win. Win for the service members and their families, get them to be a dual income family. It's a win for our communities who now have the ability to tap into talented nurses, teachers, paralegals, doctors, desperately needed professions. And it's a win for our nation's security. It's an opportunity to recruit a little bit better, to retain definitely a little bit better, and keep our precious talent on the books for longest service terms, and ultimately lead to stronger national security. So I ask that you all support this. This has got strong bipartisan support. My colleague from California, Salud Carbajal, is a co-sponsor, former proud veteran, and it's been an honor to navigate this with him. And I'm also willing to work with colleagues to address any concerns that we have in the final passage of this bill, either through amendments or answering any questions that you all have. So again, Mr. Chairman, thank you for having me and appreciate the support.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia. Appreciate you being here. Now I'd like to welcome and recognize another colleague from California, a great friend from the San Diego region, Congressmember Jacobs, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for everything you're doing to represent San Diego's veterans on this committee and for letting me join for this hearing. Before I came to Congress, I worked on childhood poverty in San Diego and a huge issue of food insecurity that we have, and a big part of it is because of veterans who are living with food insecurity. So I was a little taken aback by the VA's testimony in regards to the discussion draft to establish an Office of Food Insecurity at the VA. I appreciate the work that the VA is doing to combat veteran hunger. Actually, the VA is really paving the way for the healthcare industry in its focus on social determinants of health, and that's why I'm confused as to why the VA would not support legislation to permanently codify an Office of Food Insecurity at the VA. Given the shared commitment of the Biden-Harris administration, Congress, the VA, and the nonprofit advocates, we all agree that ending veteran hunger is incredibly important. It feels like the time's right to act to make food insecurity a lasting priority by making an office dedicated to the issue permanent so it can exist in perpetuity in future administrations. My staff worked closely with committee staff to draft this legislation. We're open to VA's feedback to improve the bill to make sure it provides the flexibility VA needs to make this office effective. So my question is to you, Ms. Glenn, how does the VA plan to ensure that the existing Food Security Program Office will continue to operate in future administrations even when priorities shift? It's critical that the grant programs I'm championing within the bill have a home in a VA office that is run by registered dietitians and social workers who understand veterans' hunger.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm going to turn that question over to my colleague, Ms. Diaz.
Hi, Ms. Glenn. I will turn it over to VA. Homelessness don't have the Food Insecurity Office, but we can ask if VBA doesn't have the answer to that question, we can certainly take it for the record.
Thank you. Yes, we'll take that question for the record.
Okay, that's pretty unacceptable since it's about the bill we are literally here to discuss today. I'm new to this committee hearing, but this seems like a real problem. I guess a follow-up question, the grant program that I'm championing in this bill, can any of the witnesses discuss why working with the community partners to develop systems to connect veterans experiencing hunger is critical to addressing their food insecurity?
Ms. Diaz, do you have anything with that?
No, we don't hold the food insecurity, but if VBA doesn't have the answer for that question, we can take it for the record, will be my suggestion.
I'm incredibly disappointed by these answers, and I really hope this doesn't reflect the priority that the Veterans Administration is putting on food insecurity, and I think just further highlights why it's so important that we have a dedicated office to address it. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank my friend and colleague, Representative Jacobs. I think the lack of your ability to answer her question speaks to the need for this legislation, and it's the lack of your expertise that we're trying to address. I think it's pretty obvious. If there are no further questions from my colleagues, we can move on to the second panel. Go ahead and do that online. Give everybody just a second. All right, it's now my pleasure to welcome our second panel, consisting of representatives from veterans service organizations, all of whom are joining us in person today. First, we have Ms. Caitlin Hetrick, Government Affairs Associate for Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. Welcome back, Ms. Hetrick. I should not have said they're all in person because I clearly see some on the Zoom. After that, we have Mr. Josh Protas, Vice President of Public Policy for Mazon, a Jewish response to hunger. Welcome back, Mr. Protas. Good to see you. Next, we have Ms. Jennifer Aiken, Senior Director of Policy and Social Impact Research for Blue Star Families. Thank you so much for joining us. After that is Ms. Catherine Monet, Chief Executive Officer for the National Coalition of Homeless Veterans. Welcome back, Ms. Monet. It's nice to see you. Another regular before our subcommittee. Finally, we have Mr. Mark Jones, Vice Chairman of the Mortgage Bankers Association. Nice to see you, Mr. Jones. We also have written statements, a number of them, from the Veterans of Foreign Wars, Food Research and Action Center, Code Platoon, Detroit School for Digital Technology, Divergence Academy, the American Legion, Student Veterans of America, and Disabled Veterans of America, which will be entered into the record. And I appreciate all those written statements. With that, I'll now begin by recognizing Ms. Hetrick for 5 minutes. Ms. Hetrick.
Chairman Levin, Ranking Member Moore, and members of the subcommittee, on behalf of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America's more than 425,000 members, thank you for the opportunity to share our views, data, and experiences on the pending legislation before the subcommittee today. IAVA appreciates the subcommittee for bringing forward several pieces of important legislation that touch on some of IAVA's top priorities, one of which being ending veteran homelessness. I would also like to thank Chairman Levin for his regular meetings with IAVA and other veteran service organizations to share valuable information during the COVID-19 pandemic and seek our input on critical legislation. The VA did not accomplish its plans to end veteran homelessness by the end of 2015, but it has made some significant progress. This is in large part due to private, local, and nonprofit partners who have teamed with VA to implement solutions. IAVA is committed to the fight to end veteran homelessness and has made this one of our top priorities going forward. Veterans should not have to worry about where they will sleep at night. Despite the huge advantages made in recent years and the steady decline in veteran homelessness from 2010 to 2019, a slight uptick was found just before a worldwide public health crisis that left many jobless. During the course of this pandemic, VA and HUD were unable to get full numbers due to COVID-19 preventing them from doing face-to-face interviews. The VA cannot solve this challenge alone. Veterans who struggle with substance abuse or who were previously incarcerated are often unable to be placed in housing programs. Even more struggle to maintain a permanent home. In IAVA's latest survey, 23% reported going without a home for over a year after they transitioned out of the military, and 77% reported couch surfing temporarily. For years, IAVA has advocated for VA to expand the definition of homelessness to include those who are marginally sheltered or couch surfing and allow them to receive the same benefits as those under the current definition of homelessness. The draft bill that it would extend the assistance program for veterans residing temporarily in a home owned by a family member would continue to help some currently in a couch surfing situation. IAVA supports this bill, but would also like to see assistance extended to all of those who are marginally sheltered. IAVA's Quick Reaction Force is a concierge veteran empowerment program helping veterans navigate an often complex roadmap to quality-free services. Since the beginning of 2022, 62% of inquiries were for emergency financial assistance related to getting basic needs met, like housing, food, and utilities. A study in 2012 found that 27% of U.S. veterans of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars experienced food insecurity, and these numbers are even higher for marginalized veterans. In our most recent survey, 21% of our members stated that they had some level of difficulty covering their basic necessary expenses with their current monthly income. The draft bill that would establish an Office of Food Insecurity at VA could help VA adequately address hunger among veterans and their families. While IAVA is waiting further testimony from VA on their capacity to implement this office, we are intrigued by the provision that requires the Secretary to collaborate with the Secretary of Agriculture and the Secretary of Defense to develop materials related to food insecurity for the TAP program curriculum and other transition-related services. Our most recent survey shows that 35% of IAVA members felt that they were not prepared to manage their finances immediately upon transition out of the military, and creating more transition-related services could assist those that might experience food insecurity and better equip them and their families upon leaving. IAVA also supports the draft legislation that would provide homeless veteran outreach services for those that have received an other than honorable discharge. Homeless veterans sometimes are also struggling with mental health conditions, many of which have gone undiagnosed. A study in 2018 found that 76.7% of homeless veteran participants had at least one prior diagnosed mental health disorder. The number is estimated to be higher due to those that have not been diagnosed. IAVA has long advocated for ensuring that all that the entire veteran population have access to quality and timely mental health care, regardless of discharge status, combat experience, or component. As it is estimated that a high number of homeless veterans experience mental health disorders, providing homeless outreach services would be a coupled effort to see all veterans find adequate housing. Once again, IAVA would like to thank you for holding a hearing that focused heavily on the topic of veteran homelessness. As we are seeing an increased cost of living across the U.S., it is of utmost importance that we keep this issue at the forefront of our minds. We must continue to fight for our veterans that struggle to find adequate housing, as well as work to get in front of this issue. If prices continue to rise at this rate, many more may find themselves worrying about keeping a roof over their heads, and VA needs to be prepared to assist. Members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to share IAVA's views on these issues today. I look forward to working with the subcommittee in the future.
Thank you, Ms. Hetrick. Appreciate your testimony as always. I now recognize Mr. Protas for 5 minutes.
Chairman Levin, Ranking Member Moore, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today on behalf of Mazon. My name is Josh Protas, and I'm proud to serve as Vice President of Public Policy for Mazon, a Jewish response to hunger. Inspired by Jewish values and ideals, Mazon is grounded in a central belief: regardless of a person's circumstance, no one deserves to be hungry. For nearly a decade, we have led national efforts to call attention to and address food insecurity among America's veterans and military families. Even before COVID-19, an estimated 11% of working-age veterans lived in a food insecure household, and food insecurity rates among low-income veterans were upward of 22%. The rates of food insecurity and other measures of economic hardship trend significantly higher for subsets of the veteran population that have unique challenges, including female veterans, Native Americans, and other veterans of color, and LGBTQ+ veterans, though more robust research and targeted interventions are desperately needed. Abby Liebman, Mazon's president and CEO, first testified about this complex crisis before the House Committee on Agriculture more than 6 years ago, shining a light on the unique circumstances facing low-income military families and veterans. She proposed thoughtful, low-cost, bipartisan policy solutions, most of which sadly remain unrealized today. Just last month, the GAO published a report about food insecurity among veterans. It offers a helpful summary of what the federal government has started, but more importantly, it highlights that much more must be done to address this crisis. Mazon's efforts and the solutions we advocate for are grounded in the unique realities of the veteran population. For many veterans who struggle with food insecurity, they often avoid calling attention to their situation due to stigma or shame. One veteran that I've come to know is Narcissus, a U.S. Army combat veteran and single mother who's raised 3 sons. When she returned to civilian life after her military service, Narcissus struggled to secure stable employment and became homeless. She could not afford food for herself and her family, which took an enormous mental toll. At one point, Narcissus contemplated suicide. Fortunately, John, a member of the local Rotary Club, reached out to offer compassion and help and connect her to services when Narcissus was at rock bottom. This small act of humanity stopped the cascading challenges that kept dragging her down. I also want to remind the committee of Tim, the Navy veteran whose story I shared with this subcommittee 2 years ago. Tim experienced a work-limiting injury and lost access to SNAP and then his housing. He survived a brutal year of homelessness in Maine, going days without food and sometimes resorting to catching squirrels to eat. Federal nutrition programs like SNAP must be central to any conversation about food insecurity in America, particularly for our veterans. An estimated 1.2 million veterans receive SNAP, but this only tells part of the story. Recent studies show that only 30% to 41% of food insecure veterans living in SNAP-eligible households are actually enrolled in the program. This is often because they don't know about SNAP, they don't think that they would be able to qualify, and they're reluctant to apply due to persistent stigma and shame. This significant SNAP participation gap among veterans is staggering and unacceptable. Food is literally within reach, but left on the table for hundreds of thousands of low-income veterans. There is simply no excuse for this shameful situation to persist. Issues like hunger, housing, and healthcare must be considered as interrelated, not in a piecemeal fashion. Committing to address these issues holistically will help ensure that our service members have a smooth, dignified transition and enjoy fulfilling lives that honor the magnitude of their service to this country. An unhoused veteran is more likely to be food insecure. A food insecure veteran is more likely to experience mental health, chronic illness, substance abuse, or even suicide challenges. And a veteran experiencing mental illness or substance abuse is less likely to be employed and have stable housing. And thus, the vicious cycle of injustice repeats for Narcissus and for Tim and for millions of the veterans who bravely serve this country. To break this cycle, we need the entirety of the federal government engaged and committed, not just the VA, but also USDA, the Department of Defense, and other agencies. Congress has a clear role to play with support, oversight, and funding. Several of the bills under consideration today will help, but there's much more that you can do, and Mazon stands ready to work with you. In particular, the establishment of an Office of Food Insecurity at the VA to coordinate interagency collaboration and accountability will go a long way towards addressing this issue. I'm about out of time, so I'll look forward to answering questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Protas. I now recognize Ms. Aiken for 5 minutes.
Chairman Levin, Ranking Member Moore, and distinguished members of the House Committee on Veterans Affairs, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. My name is Jennifer Aiken. I'm an Army spouse, soon to be the spouse of an Army veteran, and Senior Director of Policy and Social Impact Research at Blue Star Families. Blue Star Families is the nation's largest grassroots military family support organization, and our work is grounded in research, which has informed policy decisions since 2009. Our premise today is simple. In order for veteran families to thrive, we must set the conditions for them to be financially resilient during their time in service. The military spouse unemployment rate has not significantly changed since 2012, is 3 to 4 times the national average, and inhibits financial stability. Gaining employment cuts poverty in half. Having an employed spouse is associated with a more positive transition experience, and food insecurity is lowest among employed active duty spouse respondents in our research. Transferring occupational licenses is an unnecessary barrier to employment for many military spouses. The Service Members Civil Relief Act was enacted to protect service members who, quote, dropped their affairs to answer their country's call. Service members themselves are not the only ones dropping their affairs to answer their country's call. Over half of active duty spouses are employed, and few are able to retain employment through a PCS move. The Military Spouse Licensing Relief Act amends the SCRA by requiring jurisdictions recognize and accept professional licenses held in good standing by military spouses following a PCS. This change helps ensure that military spouses in licensed professions are not at a disadvantage by virtue of their military service. Unreimbursed housing and relocation expenses also exacerbate financial stress. Most respondents to our survey pay well over the amount DoD projects they should be paying for housing. The issues that our respondents prioritize are not reflected in current BAH calculations. Military families who PCSed during this year's housing crunch found themselves facing long housing wait lists, scarce rental availability, fast rising home prices, and a competitive seller's market that made it challenging to utilize VA home loan programs. This issue hits close to home. My brother recently shared his story with me. His message reads, quote, from February 5th to April 28th, I lived in a studio apartment or hotel with a pregnant wife and 2 dogs. On post couldn't keep us for more than 10 days, so we found an off-post short-term rental. It was the best we could find and cost us nearly $4,000. After 2 housing contracts fell through due to undervalued VA appraisals and incurring hundreds of dollars in unreimbursed appraisal fees, they chose not to use their VA home loan benefit. Veterans and service members deserve to be able to use the benefits they have earned, regardless of nationwide housing market fluctuations. By bringing regulations and appraisal processes more in line with current home buying practices, the Improving the VA Home Loan Benefit Act will help veterans and currently serving military families alike. All these factors contribute to food insecurity. Our research has revealed alarming rates of food insecurity among both military and veteran families. The problem is not limited to junior enlisted ranks. Over half of veteran families of color report food and nutrition resources to be an unmet need, and uncertainty about eligibility and how to access available resources are the top 2 barriers for military and veteran families of color. Establishing an Office of Food Insecurity within the VA would address these challenges by connecting veterans with food resources and increasing understanding and collaboration at the local level. The legislation discussed here today will help alleviate acute challenges, but more can be done to set the conditions for military families to be financially resilient during their time in service. For example, Congress can pass the BAH Restoration Act and the BAH Calculation Improvement Act to reduce out-of-pocket housing costs for military families. Work with DoD to ensure military families have more control over when and where they relocate. This would allow them to make decisions that support their family's overall financial stability and may require a reconsideration of current up or out talent management policies. So supporting a fixed period of federal student loan deferment for military spouses would also help alleviate burdens for those who have to leave a job in order to relocate on military orders. No one solution will solve the myriad financial challenges military and veteran families face. However, this discussion helps move the needle. I would again like to thank the distinguished members of the committee for inviting Blue Star families to testify today and for their continued attention to military and veteran family issues. I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Aiken. I now recognize Ms. Monet for 5 minutes.
Chairman Levin, Ranking Member Moore, and distinguished members of the Subcommittee on Economic Opportunity. Thank you for the opportunity to offer our views virtually today. My written remarks offer only views for legislation which could impact efforts to prevent and end homelessness among veterans and their families. NCHV supports the Healthcare for Homeless Veterans Act. The HCHV program is critical in maintaining VA's ability to reach our nation's homeless veterans. Expanded eligibility to veterans with other than honorable discharge statuses would allow for more seamless integration with other VA programs that have already incorporated this group within their benefits. The HCHV program is indeed the front door to homeless services in many communities, and bringing eligibility in line with other homeless veteran programs is in fact the right thing to do. NCHV supports the discussion draft extension of certain Department of Veterans Affairs programs for homeless veterans. The language in this legislation would extend program authorizations for the VA's Advisory Committee on Homeless Veterans and the Grant and Per Diem Program Special Needs Grants, which provide services for those homeless veterans with some of the most acute needs. NCHV supports the intent of the discussion draft SSVF pilot. Access to supportive services is critical to the success of any housing placement. However, developing an additional technology system to track homeless veterans and their issues may actually complicate the issue more than it resolves it. Comparable data systems are already widely used nationally, such as HUD's Homeless Management Information System and VA's Homeless Operations Management System. One issue that actually may work to close the voucher utilization gap is further deployment of the Housing Navigator model across the spectrum of programs working with veterans experiencing homelessness. These navigators work with local property managers, landlords, and owners to find opportunities for homeless veterans who have housing vouchers to find their own apartment. NCHV supports the discussion draft establishing a Department of Veterans Affairs Office of Food Insecurity, as no veteran should be without the means to sustain themselves or their families. Current estimates can vary widely, ranging from 6 to 24% or twice that of the general US population. But there are even higher rates of food insecurity that have been reported among certain high-risk subgroups, including homeless and formerly homeless veterans, clocking in at a whopping 49% facing food insecurity. I'm so used to talking about housing. And veterans with serious mental illness facing about 35% of, 35% of veterans with serious mental illness, are facing food insecurity. There's a need for coordination of additional research and data collection within the multiple federal nutrition programs so veterans are accessing the complete range of benefits that they're eligible for. This legislation would also create a pilot program to support partnerships that address food insecurity among veterans and their dependents. NCHV supports the discussion draft to expand and improve VA's COVID-19 VRAT and Vet Tech program. The language would extend additional access to training programs for veterans re-entering the workforce, and stable employment can play such a key role in the depth and duration of a veteran's homelessness, as well as their plans to exit housing insecurity and remain stably housed. NCHB does not support the discussion draft Tiny Homes for Veterans Act as it is currently drafted. While we're not opposed to a tiny homes pilot, we have previously shared with this committee concerns that funding for this pilot could limit funding available for existing grant and per diem programs that are already a proven successful model for serving veterans experiencing homelessness. In addition, language is drafted creates a little bit of complexity for providers where GPD providers will be required to educate veterans on becoming licensed contractors, have them participate in the building process, and could potentially be left with the responsibility and liability of maintaining any premises built when you're looking at, your housing lots, communal areas, et cetera. When you take this all into account, it's unclear whether a sufficient number of providers would be able to pull together this type of training program. And it's also unclear whether the GPD program requirements to meet NFPA life safety codes would severely limit access to the types of tiny homes that may be allowable if this pilot is enacted. As such, we're not able to support this bill as drafted today, but we do look forward to working with the committee on language that would better address stated concerns regarding this legislation. Thank you for the opportunity to share our views with you today.
Thank you, as always, Ms. Monet. I'll now recognize Mr. Jones for 5 minutes.
Chairman Levin, Ranking Member Moore, and members of the subcommittee, I appreciate the opportunity to testify this morning on behalf of the Mortgage Bankers Association, a national association representing more than 2,200 member firms and an industry that employs roughly 390,000 individuals and provide real estate finance-related services in virtually every community across our nation. My name is Mark Jones, and I'm here today in my capacity as Vice Chairman of the MBA. I am also the co-founder and CEO of AmeriFirst Home Mortgage, a privately held independent residential mortgage lender based in Kalamazoo, Michigan. I am proud and honored to be part of AmeriFirst's growth from a single site in Kalamazoo, Michigan in 1983 to more than 70 locations and 900 employees throughout the United States today. To date, our company has helped countless individuals and families achieve the American dream of home ownership through a variety of financing options. Many of these customers have been our nation's active duty and retired service members who have courageously earned the right to utilize their VA financing. The MBA commends Congressional BOST for introducing H.R. 7735, the Improving the VA Home Loan Benefit Act of 2022. VA home loans represent one of the most important benefits our nation's veterans earn through their selfless service to our country. This bill will accelerate the process of updating VA's rules and program guidelines governing home appraisals and holds potential to make veterans' home purchase offers more viable in the many competitive housing markets that we experience today across the country. Today, we all know how important the dream of home ownership can be for Americans in terms of accumulating wealth and maintaining stability within our nation's families and communities. The VA Home Loan Program plays a crucial role in increasing that availability and affordability of mortgage credit for service members, veterans, and their surviving spouses. MBA supports H.R. 7735, which targets 3 specific areas that are important for our veterans and military families, including the clarification of, first, when an appraisal is actually necessary. Second, how appraisals are to be conducted and the process by which the VA approves valuation. And third, a review of who is eligible and licensed to conduct a VA appraisal. The legislation also requires the VA to address several additional key areas for improvement, including when minimum property requirements, property waivers, and increased use of technology and hybrid appraisals should be permitted. Lenders, appraisers, sellers, realtors, and most importantly, VA buyers will all benefit from this common sense legislation that can help make housing markets more accessible and affordable to service members. As consideration of H.R. 7735 progresses, MBA urges the members of this subcommittee to go further and consider directing the VA to not only modernize and streamline its current processes, but also align them with those of the FHA and the housing governmental sponsored enterprises Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to the greatest extent possible. It is clear, based on today's hearing and numerous bills under consideration, that our military families should have full access to the benefits they have fought for and earned. In this regard, MBA remains concerned about the potential for further increases to the VA home loan funding fees. The industry is also concerned that fee increases enacted and implemented over recent years are not properly correlated with the risks associated with the VA home loan program, putting the funding fee schedule into greater misalignment with the actual risk profile of the veteran borrowers. MBA urges Congress to ensure that these funding fees are set at levels commensurate with the risks associated with the VA Guaranteed Home Loan Lending Program, and to conduct oversight and analysis of past funding fee increases rather than levying further increases. In conclusion, MBA is committed to the promotion of best practices and standards that generate healthy and responsible mortgage market, and we stand ready to assist in developing and implementing solutions to the issues under discussion today. Our industry looks forward to working with the subcommittee and the administration to develop practical solutions that will improve the VA home loan program and create a system that is more modern, effective, and accessible for all participants in the real estate market, especially active duty and retired service members. Thank you again to Ranking Member Bost for introducing H.R. 7735, and I thank you for the opportunity to testify as a part of this panel this morning, and I look forward to answering any of your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jones. With that, I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes to begin the question portion of the hearing. Ms. Aiken, I'll begin with you. Blue Star Families did some great work early in the COVID pandemic to examine the impacts on military families. Can you discuss the financial impacts of the stop movement order on military families who are in the middle of permanent changes of station?
Absolutely, and thank you for the question. In the early weeks of the pandemic, in fact, the first 10 weeks of the pandemic, we were able to stand up a continuous polling effort. As part of that, we immediately saw that the stop movement was really affecting military families in a few ways. Many were losing deposits on homes. They were losing utility deposits. Many of them lost their homes altogether because they had already been promised to another incoming individual, and now they were no longer needing to leave it. Many of these issues were solved in previous legislation, but I am excited to be able to say this will also help prevent additional issues moving forward. And I appreciate the fact that you introduced the utilities piece in particular to the SCRA.
Thank you. Could you expand on how the ability to cancel contracts without penalty could help these families?
Absolutely, and I'll break it down quite simply. If I receive military, or my family receives military family orders, we are planners. We are trying to plan ahead. We try to find schools, we find childcare, we find housing. We would like to be able to move into a house so that we have internet the day we walk in, because that minimizes the amount of time I need to step away from my job. In the event that a stop movement order were to occur, I would lose the deposits that I've made on any utilities that I've set up in some cases. And so I may not have internet, I may not have water, I may not have electricity turned on the day I move in if I decide to wait until I arrive at my home. This closes that loophole. It allows my family to go ahead and plan ahead, have all of those services in place, and if a stop movement order occurs, we can turn them off without penalty.
Thanks, Ms. Aiken. Appreciate that very much. Ms. Hetrick, I also appreciate IAVA's support for this bill, the Emergency Relief for Service Members Act. Do you have anything else to add about how the stop movement order affected PCSing families and how this bill might help?
I think that Ms. Aiken said it exactly as we would. It definitely would help those who may have those orders and have set everything up to make sure that their family is prepared, and then find out that they are unable to make that change, and it really relieves the stress from them in an already stressful time. So the pandemic has been extremely stressful. So any way that we can make sure that our service members and their families have that stress taken away is extremely helpful.
Thanks, Ms. Hetrick. Mr. Jones, I'll turn to you. I really appreciated working with MBA last year to improve my Veteran Home Energy Savings Act to ensure that your members could successfully implement it. And I look forward to similarly working with you on the Building Credit Access for Veterans Act. What feedback does MBA have on this bill, and how can we make it even stronger? It's the Building Credit Access for Veterans Act, the alternative credit
thank
scoring
you.
bill.
I know it by the alternatives credit scoring bill. Thank you very much. Thank you for the question, Chairman. We believe, first of all, VA does not have minimum credit scores. They really leave it up to the individual lenders to make their criteria. And some of the different credit scoring alternatives models they're being vetted through all the other agencies as well. And I think any type of additional credit scoring that we could use to help make those determinations is beneficial. So while I support the looking into it, we really want to do the research to make sure it's there. John had mentioned that they're seeing 9%. It's already looking through that process. So I think any type of new credit scoring model that we can use to help take some of these other things into consideration, as you mentioned, utility bills, et cetera, is going to be beneficial to the program. But we need to vet it out properly.
Okay, I look forward to doing that with you in the months ahead. Pivoting to the Improving Access to the VA Home Loan Act, how would waiving VA appraisals change the level of risk to veteran borrowers?
I don't think we're suggesting to waiving an appraisal. What we're talking about here is creating a new system where we've got a different, instead of an appraisal panel, we have lenders able to pick their own appraisers. One of the problems we have as with the industry in a writ large is that there is less and less appraisers. The VA has an acute problem with that because they've got a panel that it's very tough to get on, and so it's limited the number of folks that can be on that appraisal list. So what we're suggesting that there's good use of technology to help when we can do desktop appraisals and using technology there, but to absolutely waive appraisals, we're not advocating for that.
Appreciate that, and I'm out of time, but I look forward to working with you and everybody here to make sure that we get as many veterans into good homes as we possibly can. With that, I'll yield to the ranking member for his questions. Oh, the ranking member's not here. With that, I'll yield to Mr. Trone, my friend from Maryland, for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This subcommittee continues to make really good common sense changes that are going to improve the lives of our vets across the country. I mean, tackling these housing availability issues, food insecurity, access to credit, all issues have an immediate positive effect. I just want to thank you and the ranking member, be able to be proud to take part in advancing this whole set of 18 bills. Ms. Hetrick, thank you for your testimony in support of Congresswoman Scanlon's bill, H.R. 3950. The Veterans Medical Legal Partnerships Act. These are formal relationships between the attorneys and the VA medical facilities. These partnerships, lawyers will be able to train the healthcare teams to screen the veterans for unmet legal needs. Then the medical teams can refer them to the veterans' on-site clinics where attorneys provide pro bono services on a variety of legal issues. Unmet legal needs are routinely cited by vets as having a negative effect on their livelihood. Could you talk a little bit about how these unmet legal needs pose a barrier to our vets' ability to thrive?
As I said in my written statement, VA already has 31 MLPs that they are using across the nation, and that has shown quite a bit of success, and they're looking at ways to do more. When we look at veterans, when they have situations that arise that they are in need of legal assistance, and maybe that puts undue stress on them and they're not sure how to go about it. They're not sure where to go. Oftentimes, even civilians don't know that how much legal help can actually assist them. So implementing a program like this to help with these types of services can help a veteran take that stress off of them and help them focus on maybe some of the things that they're not focusing on as much. So if they are struggling with maybe an eviction type situation or any of those types of things, they're able to access these MLPs and see some services and some assistance. I hope that answers your question. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's good. And these unmet legal needs, how do they sometimes lead into other problems and other veterans and the sort of spiral in a bad direction in the veteran's life when these needs aren't directly addressed?
I mean, so if these legal needs cause them undue stress, then they might push it off and decide, I can't deal with this right now. And then that can have an effect and eventually lead to potential homelessness if they're not able to pay certain bills, and then they have collections taken against them in those types of situations. Then MLPs can help to assist with negotiating that and helping to reduce maybe some of the fees and some of the amounts so that they're able to pay in a timely manner. And so that can then put them on a better track to getting back into a good space.
What do you think is the most important barrier that this is going to remove? One area, if you had to pick, that where we really have our vets are put in a rough spot, and this is going to change that, what would that be?
I think the removal of stress. Stress honestly causes so many issues with veterans and just humans in general. When we have a lot of stressors, sometimes it's hard to focus on the things that we have to focus on. And so if we know that we have this resource and we know that they're able to assist us with specific legal needs, then that can really remove some of the stress. We don't always know the ins and outs of certain legal situations. And so having that resource and knowing that we can turn to someone who does know the ins and out of these types of issues is a great way to remove that undue stress and know that we're receiving the assistance that we can.
Now, you're dead on. We've got a huge mental health crisis in America, and our vets have already got extra difficulties and challenges from the things that they have to deal with every day. Then all of a sudden, a complexity of an area that's gray. It's not black, it's not white, it's gray, and they can't really cut through it. And so I think this bill is wonderful, and that it's going to help give them clarity. And as you said, that'll cut back on the stress for better mental health. So thank you very much, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the representative, and I thank him for his great leadership on mental health issues in particular. Next, I'd like to recognize Ms. Slotkin for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the ranking, who I know has departed, and to the VA and our VSOs for being here. Sorry to make you crane your neck over here. I apologize. So I just wanted to take a second to talk about a couple of issues that I'm very focused on. One is cybersecurity, and the other one is the spread of misinformation and disinformation. And I know that the bill that I've proposed on helping veterans combat, I guess it's called Empowering Veterans Against Cyber Threats Act, was talked about earlier when I wasn't here, and by the ranking member. There's some questions about jurisdiction between the VA committee and the Homeland Security Committee. Luckily, I'm on the Homeland Security Committee. I'm on the Cyber Subcommittee. So one way or another, we'll get this done, but I would posit that I believe where this belongs is in the Veterans Committee, because it is specifically trying to help our veterans educate themselves and protect themselves from basically the rampant cyber threats that are going on across the country. We know that every American is dealing with this, but our veterans can be particularly targeted by their veteran status. And I think that we have to acknowledge just how pervasive cyber attacks are. Sometimes from a state-directed actor, but more often than not for money, for ransomware, in order to gain someone's personal information for their own gain. I would just note that I had all the superintendents from my district, school superintendents, in Washington for a conference a month or so ago, and I said, raise your hand if the children's data from your K through 12 school has ever been attacked or an attempted attack, and every single superintendent put up their hands. About half of them had paid the ransom. So it's just kind of pervasive. And we know that veterans make a lot of decisions, like the rest of us, based on what they read online, what they see online, things like employment and health and wellness, family choices, engagement in the democratic process. It all comes like the rest of the citizens, from what we see and around us in the world. And we know that social media has been a favorite target of foreign actors with misinformation and disinformation. All you have to do is look that now that Russia has invaded Ukraine, most cable companies in the United States have finally shut off RT, Russia Today, literally a propaganda TV program from the Russian government, paid for the Russian government, that you could get on American televisions, right? That's bonkers. So we were attacked, certainly we know going back to 2016 on this misinformation and disinformation. So what we're proposing is that we need a bill that helps in particular protect our veterans from these threats, educate them on the sort of standard cyber threat, which all Americans are facing, protecting their personal data online, but then also educating them around misinformation and disinformation. So this is why I plan to introduce this bill and make sure that our veterans are ready to face that threat in particular. And we can certainly work out the jurisdiction between my two different committees. I know that Ms. Aiken from the Blue Star Family organization has already supported the bill, and so I just wanted to maybe, Ms. Aiken, get a little bit of hum a few bars for us, if you would, about your perspective and your experience on how we can best equip our veterans to protect themselves, first against cyber threats and then against misinformation and disinformation.
Well, most of our work around this is going to be from the military family perspective, but I think a lot of what you develop in military life carries on as you're a veteran or the spouse of a veteran. For us, we know from many of the reasons that you already discussed that military families are more vulnerable to fraud, financial fraud in particular. They're more vulnerable to cybersecurity threats. And one of the things that you didn't mention that is very sensitive to us is it's very important that we protect our online identity for operational security reasons. So in some ways, those help us, but in other ways, they do make us a more vulnerable population. In terms of mis and disinformation, we actually did see the effects of some of this very early on during the pandemic, right before the vaccine was released. We spent quite a bit of time polling our community to understand their intentions about receiving the COVID-19 vaccine. And we then invested quite a bit of time into helping dispel some of those myths and really empower military families with accurate information to make good decisions for their family. And I see that we're over time, so I will yield back.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Representative Slotkin. I'll next turn to the ranking member who has returned for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had to step out for a couple of quick votes, so we were set up next door. But Mr. Jones, I want a couple of questions. Can you tell us how the VA's strict rules on minimum property requirements are making the VA product less competitive?
Absolutely. Thank you, Ranking Member. The way I look at it, the whole rest of the industry is in driving through the appraisal process is trying to determine market value, as that's really the critical thing. Are we giving too much value to this home or not enough? And the loan to value is all that are driven from that. And then separately, there will be a mechanical inspection that's ordered. Now, if there's a serious issue with the property, the appraiser is obviously going to address that because that impacts market value. But picky little things like the chipping paint, or I think you mentioned earlier, two handrails versus one handrail, those types of things are put together in the VA process. So you've got the mechanical inspections and the valuation determination kind of in the same bucket. And so if something like the handrail example is a problem, it then has to go back and it ping pongs back and forth. And so that process is seen as by the real estate industry as really creating a much longer period of time because of that. The other thing that happens in the VA in particular, and I said this to the chairman earlier, is because they are not opening up their appraisal box to everybody else that the GSEs use, FHA uses. We're limited to a certain number of appraisers within the VA's roster. And those appraisers don't see the lenders as their client. They see the VA as their client. And so we're not getting the kind of response that we need from them. So I would move that we try and get some sort of opening of that. And finally, I will tell you, out there in the real world, when you've got 10 offers coming in for a real estate property, the pecking order is cash, 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 conventional, conventional with contingencies, and then VAs down here at the bottom. And if a veteran's going to win that borrower or that property, they're going to have to overbid the top cash offer even to be considered. So that's what we've got going on right now with VA offers in the market.
How are we going to keep pace with inflation? I mean, we see it in the industry out there as far as appraisals. Everything is going even above appraised value right now. So to make the VA loans more competitive, how do we keep pace? What do we do to help those individuals trying to buy?
Again, I think we need to rethink how the VA appraisal panel works, and I think we need to bifurcate the valuation determination and the mechanical inspection.
So in that process, how do we protect the buyers and the taxpayer alike too? In other words, there has to be, we obviously have a responsibility here, but we want to make sure we're competitive. How do we do that? Any ideas?
Well, I think the lenders hold a certain amount of accountability for the appraisal that the appraiser that they're looking at, because our underwriters are evaluating the appraisals as well. And I think technology is also going to come into play and help us with some of this determination. So as far as protecting the veteran and protecting the VA, lenders are used to having this kind of responsibility with every other loan type. When I sell a loan to Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, if my underwriter screwed up and made a mistake on determining whether the value was right based on the appraisal they got, it's coming back to me. We're big boys. That could happen. It should happen here if we screw up. But let us make that call, because I think we can do it better and more efficiently.
So the rest of the industry has kind of handled the reliance on desktop appraisals and other options to address the delays. Are we embracing that some, you think, or a little slow maybe on desktop?
I think we're in the process of, using technology kind of sparingly and kind of feeling as we go along. I think ultimately, with the data sets that the GSEs have, it will become more and more a part of doing business. We'll typically get an appraisal waiver at a lower loan to value, 70% or 75% because of that. The higher loan to values still are asking you to get, a field appraisal, but what could happen is kind of a hybrid between that and, allowing the appraiser to utilize some of the technology that's available so that they can do their research, maybe get schematics of the property, pictures online, and expand their geographic competencies. I think so as we move forward, technology is going to improve that process.
Good, thank you. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back 15 seconds.
Thank you, Ranking Member Moore. I'll now recognize Representative Scanlon for 5 minutes.
Hi, thank you so much, Chairman Levine, and to my colleagues on this subcommittee for allowing me to join you today as co-chair of the bipartisan Access to Legal Aid Caucus. So I'm really proud that my bill, HR 3950, the Veterans Medical Legal Partnership Act of 2021, has been included in today's hearing to consider how we can better serve those who've bravely served our country. I'm sure I speak on behalf of my Republican colleague, Brian Fitzpatrick, when I say that we hope this bipartisan bill can move quickly through committee and go to the floor. Now, this committee knows all too well that veterans often face hurdles when trying to access the benefits they've earned. They have higher incidence of mental health, disability, and legal issues, and the combination of these social needs can negatively impact health outcomes for them and their families. Before coming to Congress, I had the opportunity to provide legal representation to veterans and service members in a variety of contexts, accessing VA and Social Security benefits, addressing homelessness, dealing with housing and medical issues, and even drafting wills and powers of attorney for veterans. I was doing this in the context of training and organizing volunteer attorneys to provide free legal services to veterans who were unable to pay standard legal fees. We invariably had more attorneys who were willing to provide these services than clients to receive them. One of the greatest hurdles we had was the difficulty in identifying eligible clients because veterans, much like Shakespeare and members of the general public, are often suspicious of lawyers. So medical legal partnerships serve multiple purposes, but the first of which is they provide the opportunity to meet veterans where they are and to have a trusted intermediary make that introduction. These medical legal partnerships, as has been described, are a holistic model that can integrate legal practice to address underlying social needs and create collaboration between legal and medical entities to facilitate solutions for veterans that might need any number of services. And we've seen similar results with partnerships with hospitals for children and other groups with specific needs. So these MLPs, medical legal partnerships, allow attorneys to help VA healthcare teams screen veterans for unmet legal needs, receive counseling on veterans benefits and Social Security, family law, landlord-tenant, and other housing issues, as well as elder law. So it's been a proven model that's been particularly helpful in preventing veterans from experiencing homelessness. So that's why I'm a big advocate for them and looking forward to doing what we can to increase access to them. Ms. Hetrick, thank you for your testimony, and I appreciate your support of this bill. I'd like to follow up on Representative Trone's line of questioning and ask why the MLP model is particularly effective at addressing veterans' unmet legal needs, and why is the model of having on-site legal assistance so important?
As you said, veterans often can be untrusting when you hear the term lawyers. I can even say in my own personal experience, I knew how effective lawyers could be in assisting just in regular day-to-day situations, but I did not realize the full extent until I worked at an elder law firm and fully understood. And now everyone that I meet and that's discussing retirement and things like that, I always discuss how elder law can be effective. So for having these types of services at their disposal through a partnership that they trust, veterans can access a whole wealth of services that they probably didn't even know existed. And as I was saying with Representative Trone, with the stressors that come with just our day-to-day lives, we often don't do the research that it takes to find out what resources are out there for us. So these medical legal partnerships can help to bridge that gap and introduce us to a whole wealth of available services that can relieve stressors, help us through, like you said, tenant and eviction type situations, or maybe just any uncriminal situations that could arise that we don't know where to turn to. So it's crucial to have these types of things available to us so that when we have legal issues arise, we know that we have a trusted source that we can turn to through this partnership.
Thank you. And very quickly, Ms. Monet, I understand that NCHV didn't provide testimony on this act, but I'd love to hear your perspective on how legal issues can push veterans into homelessness and how these legal partnerships can help with things such as SOAR and other benefits.
Thank you. So we actually support the Medical Legal Partnerships Act of 2021. Veterans experiencing homelessness are at a much higher risk of facing legal issues. And oftentimes what we've seen from our members who have legal supports within their programs is that they get better outcomes. The legal supports can help with evictions, as Ms. Hetrick said, but they can also help with other things ranging from child custody issues to accessing your ID if you don't have that, and very basic things that you wouldn't necessarily think that you'd need a legal services support to do, but they can also kind of help with that. I do want to raise that, support with evictions and foreclosure prevention and that type of stuff is really critical when you think about the fact that veteran suicide risks increase much more right at the onset of homelessness. So when you're talking about medical legal partnerships, it's not just that it's a nice to, it truly is life-saving for veterans. And I certainly hope that the rest of the committee will come around to supporting this bill and moving it forward.
Thank you. I see my time has expired. And again, I'm very grateful for having the opportunity to participate in this panel.
Thank you, Representative Scanlon. I'd now like to recognize my good friend from California, Dr. Ruiz. Good to see you. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for letting me speak at today's Economic Opportunity Subcommittee legislative hearing. I'm here to talk about my bill, the Healthcare for Homeless Veterans Act. Well, I was extremely encouraged early this year to see that the numbers of veterans experiencing shelter homelessness decreased across the country by 10% in the latest point in time count. There is more to do to care for our veterans experiencing homelessness. In my district, veterans homelessness is still a prevalent issue. In Riverside County, for example, the number of veterans living on the street in emergency shelters or transitional housing has been increasing since 2018. Between 2019 and 2022, Riverside County saw a 5% increase in veterans living on the street. And this is heartbreaking. We must do more to ensure that veterans who have served and sacrificed for our nation do not wind up without a place to live when they come home. Right now, the VA has several programs to assist veterans who are homeless. They provide payments to organizations who temporarily house veterans, provide grants to veterans on the cusp of homelessness, and help with support services for those in the HUD-VASH program. These programs serve all veteran populations, regardless of discharge status, including veterans with an other than honorable discharge. However, one program that aims to connect homeless veterans with healthcare services in their communities exclude those veterans with an other than honorable discharge. Those veterans are turned away at the door if they go to the VA seeking healthcare resources in their community. This also means that these veterans are unable to attend outreach events aimed to provide resources to homeless and at-risk veterans, such as the VA's Stand Down event, in which VA staff and volunteers provide food, clothing, and health screenings. My bill would close this gap and allow the VA to connect these veterans with healthcare resources in their communities. My bill would also grant them access to attend outreach events such as the Stand Down programs to get help. By expanding eligibility to this group of veterans, we would be providing care for some of our most vulnerable veterans, those who in many cases need our help the most. I'm grateful that the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans and the National Alliance to End Homelessness have endorsed the bill, and I encourage my colleagues on the committee to do so as well. My question, Ms. Hetrick, do you believe that expanding the VA's healthcare outreach services to other than honorable discharge veterans would take resources away from the honorably discharged veterans?
I don't believe that that would take services away from honorably discharged veterans. We feel that all veterans should receive this type of assistance. As we stated in our testimony, we are supportive of this legislation.
Thank you so much. And Ms. Monet, can you please elaborate on how the Healthcare for Homeless Veterans Act would increase access to VA's outreach programs that connect veterans with other than honorable discharges to healthcare in their communities?
Absolutely. So the Healthcare for Homeless Veterans program is truly one of the unsung heroes within VA's toolbox of resources for veterans experiencing homelessness. They offer healthcare, they run the drop-in centers, they fund stand-downs. That's also the program that really looks at coordinated entry and matching veterans to the right housing program that meets their needs. So when you think about the fact that veterans with certain discharge statuses are not allowed to participate in the very basics, like here's how you get connected to programs, it sort of feels like we're just leaving them outside the door and they've got to figure out how to find the side door in or another way, or maybe somebody else will outreach to them if they're lucky. But in certain communities, veterans with other than honorable discharges make up the majority of the people experiencing unsheltered homelessness because there's not a lot of outreach capacity beyond what the VA can offer with the Healthcare for Homeless Veterans program, and that's just not acceptable. So I do appreciate your leadership in introducing this bill and ensuring that all veterans can access as many programs as possible.
Thank you. Can you describe some of the barriers that these veterans experiencing homelessness face by not having access?
Absolutely. I mean, I think outreach is one of the really big things, right? If you don't know what's out there to help you, how can you access services and support, right? And so when you think about the fact that VA's got all of these really great programs, but if nobody's coming to you and telling you about them, or maybe you don't know that they exist and you're out there talking to folks that maybe you're not connecting with, I mean, it really is the difference between cities having unsheltered encampments of people outside with no support and having people moving inside and accessing all of the benefits that our partners at VA and HUD can offer. So
Thank you so much for your work. Thank you all for the great work that you all do. I really appreciate that. You're making a big difference. So with that, I yield back my time.
Thank you, Dr. Ruiz. Appreciate having you here. Appreciate all of our witnesses. If there are no further questions, we can bring this hearing to a close. All members will have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include additional materials. Without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.